Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board's interview for August Universal Primary in Florida Senate District 15, which spans an area of Northwest Orange County that includes parts of Paramore, Pine Hills, Winter Garden, Ocoee, Dr. Phillips area, Eatonville, Apopka, and Washington Shores. This race features two very familiar faces: Senator Geraldine Thompson, who has served in the legislature since 2006, alternating between the House and the Senate, and former State Senator Randolph Bracy, who has also served in the Senate from 2012 to 2016. These two Democrats are the only two candidates in this race, which means that all voters in District 15, including Republicans, Democrats, third-party voters, and people who do not have a party affiliation, will be able to vote on August 20th or before. And I would like to start with our first question. Both of you are very well-grounded in the political realities facing Democrats in the state legislature, which is so lopsidedly Republican that it will almost certainly remain in GOP hands after this election. Should you be the one representing District 15 in 2025, what would you do to make sure your constituents' viewpoints are respected? And we will start with Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have always worked across the aisle in a bipartisan fashion to get things done that benefit my community. And since I returned to the Senate, I was able to expand the Children's Initiative, which at one time was limited to 5 communities and now is expanded to 7. And that is the Florida Children's Initiative, which now in Orange County includes not only the Paramore Kids Zone, but also Inglewood and Mercy Drive. That is a bill that I passed since I returned to the Senate, in addition to the Tyree Sampson Act, which means that there are now standards for amusement rides here in the state of Florida. I was able to get an appropriations passed for Oakland and Apopka. And one of the things in the legislature is whenever you introduce a measure in one chamber, you have to have a companion in the other chamber. So you'll hear a lot about what has been done. And for much of what you will hear, I was the House sponsor. When he was in the Senate, I was in the House. And so for much of what he takes credit for are things that I sponsored in the Florida House.
Listen, it's my turn. Listen, I'm here to start a movement, a better me, a better you, a better us. And it is about people. I've been the most successful legislator from Central Florida. Geraldine Thompson, let me just talk about the movement. It's a better me, a better you, a better us. And basically, what I'm trying to do is help people to be the best version of themselves. As I've taken a step back from politics, I realize that we as people have to become our best selves to affect government. My record is unmatched. She is trying to attach herself to what I've passed. And it's called for example, the Randolph Bracy Ocoee Scholarship Program. That the Republicans named that after me. I say Bethune-Cookman University. She was not the House sponsor. I got Ron DeSantis to sign a bill to teach the Ocoee massacre across the state. She was not the House sponsor. She will lie about these things and try to attach herself to what I've done, but it's simply not true. She's been in office for 2 decades, and she's passed one bill. She's talking about an appropriation that happens every year. She's trying to attach herself to the Oakland money that I got, that I started, and now every year it is funded. She has not started anything on her own that has had any substance. 20 plus years, and her record does not come close to matching mine. I can go on and on. I got Apopka fire station. I got Oakland, that wastewater system that now continually gets funded. Ocoee scholarships. I've taken care of this whole district. Mortgage assistance for people. the list goes on and on.
Thank you very much. And just so that our readers know, we have asked both candidates to follow a format that we've used for all of these videos, which is to address the issues and what they would do. So we are hoping to hear about our candidates' plans. And with that, I'm gonna.
I think it's important, though, that I be able to say when she tries to.
Yes, sir, but we've asked that there not be back and forth between the two of us.
She can't lie.
I'm going to go
and
ahead
say
and move
this.
on to our next question. I would like to ask you to look back to a series that I'm sure you both remember, the Sentinel Schools Without Rules. That exposed some of the issues with some of the schools that are accepting vouchers. In the coming school year, more than 400,000 students will be receiving one of several public education vouchers, which are often used to pay private school tuition. That investigation found little to no accountability in how those private schools spent this money. Is Florida doing enough to ensure that schools accepting vouchers provide the high quality education guaranteed in the state constitution? And Senator Bracy, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, private schools need more accountability, and I've been a public school teacher. I've worked in the public school system, and I know the work that goes into preparing lesson plans, teaching kids at all different levels. And so when you're talking about private schools not having that accountability measure, I think it's important that they do. But I also still think that there is a place for private schools, vouchers, and charter schools, because we have students that have different needs, different trades. And so I've been in the trenches of getting teachers more funding over the years, working with charter and private schools to help them become more accountable, but absolutely, they need more accountability.
Thank you, Senator Thompson.
Well, I think we all know that voucher schools, private schools don't have to meet the same standards as public schools. The teachers don't have to be certified. The curriculum does not have to be approved by the state of Florida. They get funding, and then when the student leaves that school, they keep the funding. It does not come back to the state of Florida. They buy buildings and they retain ownership of the building rather than the buildings now being public. 90%, actually over 90% of students in Florida attend public schools. And I think that that's where the investment needs to be. Let's make sure we have strong public schools before we start experimenting with vouchers. That is something that former Senator Randolph Bracy supported, giving public dollars to private schools where there is no accountability. I'm a former teacher here in Orange County, a former college professor, a former college administrator. And I know that when you have a situation where you don't have the right materials, you don't have the right equipment, your facilities are not up to par, students are not going to learn as well. So I applaud you for your expose of schools without rules. And I think we invest in public schools so that we have a strong public educational system before we start sending more money. Now it's vouchers for all. But before we send more money to private voucher schools where there is no accountability.
I will just respond. I always advocated for accountability for private schools, and I will continue to do so. But as I said, every student is not meant for the public school system. And I believe that. And I think there should be options for students with accountability.
Right. Did you want to briefly respond, Senator Thompson?
I objected last session when the Vouchers for All law was put in place, because as I said, there is not just an infinite amount of money. So if you take money from the public schools, to put it into the private schools, that means a diminished and a weakened public school system. And that's one of our constitutional responsibilities, to provide a quality education for students in Florida, public education. And I am a proponent for public education.
Well, let me say this. I'm a proponent of public education too.
Mr. Bracy.
Sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Bracy, we need to move on. We're going to run out of time before we run out of questions. All right, Jay?
Yes. Wanted to pivot over and talk about health insurance. About 11% of Floridians lack health insurance, which is well above the national average. And Florida is one of the few states that refuses to expand Medicaid. What are your feelings on Medicaid expansion? And if expansion is not the answer, what help can lawmakers offer Floridians who make too much for Medicaid but are shut out of the healthcare marketplace? And Mr. Bracy, we'll start with you.
Well, the truth is the legislature is not going to pass Medicaid expansion. And so we've got to continue to look for other ways to ensure these folks. I mean, there's other options the state can do. There are other federal monies, but we have to deal with the reality that Medicaid expansion is not going to happen. We've got to realize that we are in a super minority, and as Democrats, and these policies aren't really going anywhere. And so what I would say is we at least need a Democrat who is able to work with the Republicans, who has success passing legislation so that we can come forward with a good solution. Coming with these solutions that we know have been rejected every year won't work. And so I'm willing to work with the Republicans to see what can we do to try to ensure these folks.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson.
To say that you should not continue to try to change things, even though it has not worked in the past, I think is a defeatist attitude. We would not have the Civil Rights Act if we took the position that this isn't going to work, it has been rejected. I have offered legislation every year to expand Medicaid. It would be helpful for businesses who now cover insurance costs that Medicaid would be able to pick up. It would mean that almost 800,000 people in the state of Florida would be able to get preventative care rather than ending up in our emergency rooms where they're seen by physicians, given medication. All of this is not free. So we end up subsidizing this health care on the back end rather than providing for it on the front end. And I am supporting an amendment. There's an effort now to get an amendment in the Constitution to get it on the ballot to expand Medicaid in the state of Florida. And things happen from the bottom up rather than the top down. And so the people in the state of Florida want an expansion of Medicaid, and they're working to get the signatures to get this on the ballot. And I am supporting it, asking other people to support it, because legislators don't always listen. And so people in the state of Florida have the opportunity to get amendments on the ballot. And they've done that with medical marijuana. They've done that with returning citizens having their voting rights restored. And just because these things have not been accepted in the past doesn't mean you throw up your hands and you give up. I will continue to support expansion of Medicaid.
Yeah, I got to say something, because this is exactly
Mr. Bracy, we're asking for no back and forth with this. It's one answer and then the other, and then we move on to the next question.
Can I speak for just 15 seconds? Because I think it's important when she comes up with something. I think it's important that people know that
you can address it. You can address it during your next time. Thank you.
Well, and this actually, the next question I was going to ask is something that has been chewing up a lot of legislative time and Freudian energy with very little, in many cases, to show for it. The so-called culture wars, where diversity, equity programs are being attacked, books are being removed from public schools, teachers are being prohibited from discussing gender identity and sexual orientation in many grades. How can Democrats help Floridians move past these discussions and get back to doing the work that Floridians need them to be doing? And that may sound like a little bit of a stacked question, but I think that both of you probably agree with that premise. Mr. Bracy, if we could start with you.
Culture wars. Let me just say this. I got Ron DeSantis to sign a Black History bill. What I'm saying is the Republican Party is going to do what they're going to do. But we need someone, despite that can actually push an agenda forward. I got reparations, the second time in the history of this country that reparations were paid to African Americans in this DeSantis administration. Okay, the second time in the history of this country, it's named after me, the Randolph Bracy Ocoee Scholarship Program, given to Ocoee students for the 1920 Ocoee Massacre. My opponent has gotten one bill passed since she's been in the legislature. She spoke of a funding bill, not an actual piece of legislation. So what I'm saying is, you're going to get this agenda from the Republican Party. It's a playbook from Trump. But let's look at people, despite being in a super minority, are still able to be successful and still able to push the culture, education, historic things like reparations. And so if I'm able to do that, the sky is the limit. Obviously, I'm able to do a lot more. And not to put her, my opponent, saying that she was attached to this, which she wasn't. These were all my bills that passed that the governor signed.
Right. Sarah Thompson.
With regard to the history of the Ocoee Massacre, he had a bill that had passed in the Senate but was dead in the House. I went to him and said, your bill is dying. We talked about an amendment. I offered an amendment, which was accepted by Representative Randy Fine. That's how the history of the Ocoee Massacre got into the curriculum here in the state of Florida. And you can certainly independently research that, and you will find that that, in fact, is the case. Now, being the sponsor of a piece of legislation is not all that is required to get it passed. He talks about rescuing Bethune-Cookman University, and apparently doesn't even know what that bill contains and what it's all about. He talks about $17 million for Bethune, when in fact the legislation was the priority of the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, and it provides $30 million of recurring funds for private HBCUs in the state of Florida. Bethune is certainly one of them, but so is Edward Waters University, and so
Kristen
is
J. I need to be able to respond because she's talking about me.
I was about to ask.
You can't. I mean, you let her talk, but then you come
We
at me.
we
Ms.
will,
Thompson,
when one of you
Yeah, I gotta
brings up the
respond.
other, we will allow a response. So, Mr. Bracy, go ahead.
First of all, what she said is not true. The state Ocoee Massacre Education Bill did pass in the Senate. The reason it didn't pass in the House because my opponent can't pass bills in the House. She never passed a bill in the House. So what happened actually is I went to Randy Fine and said, your bill is not going to come through the Senate, which was a Holocaust education bill, until you put my bill on, till you pass my bill with your Holocaust education bill. And that's why the governor signed it, because he didn't want to veto the Holocaust education bill. Geraldine Thompson's amendment had nothing to do with the bill. It was going to pass. It was already negotiated. She had nothing to do with it. It was negotiated between myself, the Senate president, the governor, and Randy Fine. Her amendment was a small amendment that had nothing to do with it. Secondly,
thank you, Mr. Bracy.
No, but she said Bethune-Cookman. Bethune-Cookman, I was the sponsor, and I picked the House sponsor. The reason is because the president of the school came to me and said, we are about to close our doors. And so I negotiated a deal with the Senate president before session started. And that's why I was the Senate. That's why I was the sponsor the Black Caucus decided to get behind it after it was already done. I was a sponsor. I did that. No
Mr.
one
Bracy.
else. And she doesn't want to give me credit, but it's the truth. Thank you. I wanted to address that because she started putting out lies, so I had to say something.
Thank you both. We're trying very hard to not be here to legislate each other's answers, but rather to put forth your own reasons and solutions to the problems that Floridians face. So thank you both for talking, but we're just trying to keep that on track.
And with that, I'd like to toss out our next question. What more do you think Florida needs to be doing to meet the challenge of responding to climate change and rising sea levels? Senator Thompson, can we start with you?
Well, first of all, the state of Florida needs to acknowledge that climate change is real and that it is due to human activity. Now, the words climate change have been stricken. They are out of policies and agency heads. So let's acknowledge that climate change is real. Let's talk about some of the solutions, which would include solar energy to decrease our footprint, our carbon footprint. Let's talk about electric cars rather than continuing to depend on fossil fuels for our automobiles. There's so much that can be done. We have already said that we don't want wind, which would mean turbines off the coast of Florida. Well, let's look at some alternatives. And we have seen our utilities, they have blocked it for many, many years, but you see our utilities now with solar energy panels, and I go to Tallahassee, they're all along I-10. So let's continue to support and encourage the kind of activity that we see in the private sector, but let's first acknowledge that climate change is real. We're having more severe hurricanes, we're having flooding, and so let's take responsibility for making sure that we get ahead of this rather than being consumed by it.
Okay, Mr. Bracy.
Thank you. I gotta say something, and this is with all due respect, but it has to be said. It's okay to talk about solutions. It's really okay. But what I'm saying is, you're talking about one bill in 20 years past. What I'm saying is, we can talk about solutions all day, but if you can't actually get it done, what are we really talking about? We talk about all these ideas, and have you done something to show that you can actually implement the idea? Listen, I'll give you an example. For example, Oakland asked me to sponsor a $750,000 appropriation for their South Lake Apopka initiative. I did it. I actually got it funded. It went to Oakland. They used that money to help clean up Lake Apopka. These are real environmental issues that are getting addressed. She gave a bunch of solutions, but she can't do any of it. And it's important that people know that. You have these conversations and we can talk about solutions, but if you can't do it, what's the point? And it needs to be said. And I'm saying it, and I've done it. I've actually put forth initiatives that have been funded and have affected Central Florida environmental community and so much more. And it needs to be said.
Senator Thompson, did you want to respond to that? And just very, very briefly, please.
Very briefly, I was the House sponsor for that legislation, and it was my work as much as his, and probably more so than his, because his colleagues will attest to the fact that he was seldom there. You can look at the Senate Journal.
Now she's saying that. Okay, now I got to respond.
Yes, just a minute, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Thompson, please continue.
You can look at committee meetings, their roll calls to establish that a quorum is present. He was seldom there. And so his aides ran his office. The legislation that he's talked about are things that I worked on the House side when I was in the House. he was in the Senate. You can't get it done in one chamber. You can't get it done by yourself. I've been in this process since 2006. You have to have a companion in the other chamber whenever you sponsor a measure in one chamber. And much of what he's claiming credit for having done by himself was a cooperative, and this is the way I think you work with people, a cooperative effort on my part in the House, his part in the Senate, the legislative Black caucus, leadership in the legislature, and that's how you get it done.
Okay,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bracy.
The Randolph Bracy Ocoee Scholarship Program. It's called that for a reason. Okay, there's not a Democrat. There's one Democrat that I've known in the last 30 years that has an appropriation named after them, and it's me. And it's because I've been the most effective. She's not the sponsor of that. She was not the sponsor of Bethune-Cookman, and I purposely picked a Republican because of stuff like this when she tries to claim stuff that is just not true. It's just not true. I've got these bills passed, these initiatives done. This is her name is not on it. Look at it. You fact check it and see if she has a bill passed when she was in the House. She doesn't. It's not true. It's not true. And you fact check that.
Thank you
Jay,
both.
did you have a next question?
Yes, I'll jump in with the next question. And I wanted to ask about homelessness. Across Florida, cities and counties are seeing a steady increase in the number of visibly homeless people. And a law just passed limits the ways that local governments can respond. Do you agree with this approach? And what are your own thoughts in terms of what can be done about homelessness at the legislative level? And Mr. Bracy, we'll start with you.
Here's the thing. I think I'm glad you came to me again. I just want to point out I have the record to actually implement stuff instead of talking about ideas. Now, here's what I think we should do about affordable housing. One, I think we need to bring back public housing. And I'm not talking about what we saw from the federal government 30, 40, 50 years ago where they had to shut down public housing. But I think that the state, our local municipalities have a role to play in this affordable housing. And I think this is a way to do it, because if the local governments implement it or the state gives grants to the local government, then the local governments can control it a lot better. You know, they couldn't control federal housing because it was federal. But now if the locals are putting it out there, local governments, I'm saying, they can control it. They can make sure it's safe. They can make sure it's up to the proper standards. And so I think we need it. Also, they can actually set the price. You know, you got developers that are in it for huge profits, but if you have government making housing and it's affordable, you know, they can set the price and make sure people can pay it. And so I think we have to look at this affordable housing situation a lot differently. And I think the states and the local governments have a role to play. And I think we need to look at public housing because you have so many out-of-state investors coming to buy up the homes. The home supply is being bought up by corporations. And you know, corporations are just profit-driven. And so people are getting pushed out, have to move, becoming homeless, have to live with a mom or dad. And we have to look at government playing a bigger role. And I think public housing is something we should look at.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson, over to you.
Yes, you asked if I agreed with the approach that we're taking, and I do not. I spoke against the measure that would require that people be put into encampments. It's now against the law for people to sleep on public property, and they have to be removed from that public property, put in camps where there may not be sanitation, there may not be security, there may not be showers available. I think we deal with the underlying issue. It's not just being unhoused. There are some mental health issues that we have to deal with. The largest place for homeless people are our jails. So we have to deal with the larger problem. I think that the Live Local Act, which I supported, was a good step in the right direction. We now have municipalities that are opting out, because if developers get tax exemptions, then those taxes don't flow to the municipalities. So we've got to go back. Things happen incrementally. So we've got to go back and talk about how do we replace the revenue that municipalities are losing through the Live Local Act. But I think it was indeed a step in the right direction to entice developers to go into the attainable, affordable housing market, and that had not existed in the past. We live in a service economy. We have people working in our hotels, working in the theme parks, and they're living in motels. So we've got to do more. And I think going back and tweaking Live Local is one of the ways that we do it, in addition to continuing to work with developers.
Thank you so much. We had other questions that we wanted to get to. Unfortunately, we are out of time since we have another interview starting in just a little while. But what I wanted to do before I ask both of you for your closing statements is to remind people that, once again, this election on August 20th is open to all the voters in District 15. And while the Orlando Sentinel will be making an endorsement in this race, we remind folks also that there are so many sources of good information to let you look more at what the candidates believe, what they might do if elected, and which one of these two candidates, very experienced candidates, most represents your own values as a voter and as a Floridian. So with that, I would ask that we make brief closing statements. There won't be any follow-ups, so please keep that in mind. But just give us your best pitch as to why voters should choose you in this contest. We'll start with Mr. Bracy.
Well, let me just say this. A lot has been said, but what I would say is check the record. She's been there for 20 years plus, almost a quarter century, and does not have much to show for it. She's at the point where now she's trying to take credit for my work. My work has been nothing short of historic. I mentioned some of them: reparations, Save the College, Cairo, when a 7-year-old was arrested, I got it and made sure that a 7-year-old was never arrested in this state. Money for the Jewish Center. I've taken care of every constituency in this district. And so not only have I been the most successful legislatively, but there's more to be done. And that's why I said we're starting a movement about people, a movement about you becoming the best version of yourself. Because when you do that, when I do that, when we all do that, our government will start to change like we've never seen it before. And if you haven't noticed, look around this country, look at our politics. Things are crumbling down and we need a movement. And so not only will you get the best legislatively, successes, accomplishments, but we all are going to come together and do something great, become our best selves, and watch the change happen in our government. And I'm happy to lead that effort. Randolph Bracy for Senate District 15. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Thompson.
Yes, I've been in the legislative process since 2006. And I know that one person doesn't get it done all by himself or herself. And I'm more about results and getting things done than chest thumping and taking the credit. And yes, I was the House sponsor for Oakland. I got the amendment passed on the Ocoee massacre. I said that the expansion of money for HBCUs was the Legislative Black Caucus. He never attended a Black Caucus meeting.
I didn't need to. I sponsored it. I did it.
Rarely present in the Senate. The Senate Journal will show you how many floor sessions he missed at roll call for committee meetings.
Not true.
He was very rarely there. You'd find him in the park playing chess. And it is important to have someone who's committed to this job, who does not see the position as a stepping stone to being governor, being president of the United States. I'm committed to this job and to the citizens of Senate District 15. I asked you to send me to
Mr.
Tallahassee
Bracy.
so that I can continue my work on attainable housing, on the property insurance crisis, on Medicare expansion, and continuing to have strong public schools. You need someone who's not a self-help guru talking about finding nirvana or Zen and you being your best self. You've got
one bill in 20 years.
The conditions that are present today. And I've already talked about the Children's Initiative, the Tyree Sampson Act. This year, I got appropriations for a civil rights museum in Tallahassee. All of these things you can check out. You can just go to the record and you will see that they are there. Send someone to Tallahassee who is truthful, who's going to tell you the truth, and who's not going to try to mislead you to think that they are all powerful and that they are able to get things done all by themselves, even when they are not present in the Capitol.
Okay. I'm afraid that because Mr. Bracy was addressed directly, and that I do need to give him a chance to respond to that.
She is trying to assassinate my character because my record is unmatched. This is the problem with the Democratic Party. And this is the problem. We let people just get away with talking about stuff and not doing anything. 20 years, one bill. I just named historic things, and now she's trying to take credit. Go back and look at news articles. You don't see anything about her passing the Ocoee Master Education, but that was my bill. She's trying to take credit. If I was so not there, then how is it that I'm so successful? It's ridiculous. Look at her record. She's been there twice as long as me, and her legislative record doesn't match. Her community and what I did for this community, feeding the community, putting forward programs, mortgage assistance, where people actually got their mortgage, all kinds of things, not to mention the legislative accomplishments. It's the truth. There's certain people that just aren't effective. And so they try to attach themselves to someone that is. The Bethune-Cookman, her name is not on it. It is my bill. I did it before we even got there. So she can try to put all these people together and say, I've been the most successful, and that's the truth. And it will continue to happen. If you want someone who has not been able, one bill in 20 years, if that's what you want, go for it. If you want someone that's going to continue to do historic things, I'm here. Okay. Thank you.
And Senator Thompson, a brief response, please.
I will send you, as you said in your opening, we could provide information to you. I will provide you the bills that I sponsored, the bills that passed, the bills that I co-sponsored, the appropriations that I got.
Co-sponsor, everyone co-sponsors stuff.
Interested in
show your sponsored bills.
Results rather than trying to take credit and pretending to be just omnipotent. And
show your sponsored bills.
Mr. Bracy, this is Ms. Thompson's time.
All by yourself. That's and since 2006, I've learned that's not the way you do it. That is not the way it happens in this process. You can't operate in a silo and say that, oh, I got this done. It takes, you're in the Senate, 40 people. It takes 50% plus one. In the House, it takes 50% plus one of 120. No one person gets it done, and you need to be truthful with the community with that regard.
Thank you very much. And I do want to thank both of you for taking the time to appear with us today. It is obviously a very hotly contested race, and we wish you both the best of luck.